Tonight, you step into frozen silence to remember what mountain men once knew about cold, and what the modern world quietly forgot. You stand at the edge of a cold morning that feels older than clocks. The sky is pale, almost apologetic, and the mountains rise ahead of you like patient teachers who have seen this lesson fail before. Snow crunches softly beneath your boots. Not loudly, not sharply, just enough to remind you that sound behaves differently when the air is cold and thin. Even noise knows when to calm down. You breathe in slowly. The air stings a little, the way carbonated water surprises your tongue. Smells clean, sharp, almost metallic. Your breath blooms white and disappears, like a thought you didn't hold onto long enough. Somewhere in the distance, a river mutters to itself beneath ice, still moving, still alive, refusing to freeze solid out of stubbornness or wisdom. Probably both. This is the kind of morning where mountain men once woke without alarm clocks, without weather apps, without heated floors or motivational podcasts telling them to seize the day. They didn't seize the day. They negotiated with it, carefully. You probably won't make it through this day awake. That's fine. That's sort of the point. Before you drift too far, though, if you're enjoying this quiet walk already, you can gently like the video and subscribe. Nothing dramatic, no sudden movements. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somewhere out there, someone else is listening under a very different sky. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk forward, deeper into the cold. The first thing you notice is that the cold isn't attacking you. It's not aggressive. It's not cinematic. It doesn't roar or threaten. It just exists, steady, uninterested in your opinion. The cold of the mountains doesn't chase you. It waits for you to misunderstand it. Mountain men understood this. Trappers, scouts, guides, men who lived for months, sometimes years, in high elevations where winter wasn't a season but a personality trait. They didn't talk about beating the cold. That would have sounded ridiculous to them, like trying to win an argument with gravity. Their major historical reality, one that modern heating systems have politely allowed us to forget, is that mountain men layered clothing not to stay warm, but to stay dry. This was not a fashion choice. This was survival math. Wool, buckskin, fur, materials that still insulate even when damp. Cotton, which modern people love and mountain men quietly despised, becomes a liability in cold environments. Wet cotton pulls heat from the body like a slow, legal theft. Mountain men knew this without scientific studies or dramatic infographics. They knew because the cold taught them. Repeatedly, you adjust your coat as the wind slides past, polite but firm. The mountain men would be wearing layers you'd find itchy, heavy, and deeply unfashionable. They would not care. Fashion does not negotiate with frostbite. You walk past a stand of pines, their branches sagging under snow. The needles whisper as the wind passes through, a sound like distant applause from an audience that appreciates restraint. Somewhere ahead, smoke curls upward from a low fire, thin and careful. A mountain man's fire is never loud. Loud fires eat fuel too quickly and attract attention. And in the mountains, attention is rarely helpful. You approach the fire and crouch, feeling its warmth brush your face without overwhelming it. This is another thing they understood. You don't rush warmth. Sudden heat after deep cold can shock the body. Mountain men warmed slowly, patiently, like thawing out a story rather than microwaving it. Here's a weird cultural tidbit they lived by. Many mountain men slept partially upright, propped against trees or rock faces, especially in deep cold. Lying flat on frozen ground pulls heat from your core faster. They learned to sleep like tired birds, conserving warmth, dreaming lightly. You try to imagine explaining this to a modern mattress company. Historians still debate how much indigenous knowledge directly influenced mountain men's cold weather practices. but the overlap is impossible to ignore. The mountains were already inhabited by people who understood cold intimately. Mountain men didn't invent wisdom. They borrowed it, sometimes respectfully, sometimes poorly, but always out of necessity. You stand again and keep walking. Your fingers tingle slightly, not painful, just alert. This is another lesson. Cold speaks early, quietly. It doesn't scream at first. It whispers. Mountain men listened. Modern life teaches us to ignore discomfort until it becomes unavoidable. Mountain men did the opposite. They adjusted at the first sign. A damp sock? Change it. Sweating too much while hiking? Slow down. Sweat freezes later. This was not motivational advice. This was arithmetic. You smile to yourself, imagining a mountain man watching someone jog uphill in a winter parka, earbuds in, dripping sweat. He wouldn't laugh. He would just shake his head slowly, like someone watching a preventable mistake unfold in real time. The fire crackles softly. Snow continues to fall, unbothered by your thoughts. You feel calmer now. You're breathing slower. Your body settling into the rhythm of cold rather than resisting it. You move on, deeper into the trees, carrying this first forgotten understanding with you. Cold is not your enemy. It is a condition, one that rewards patience and punishes arrogance with remarkable consistency. And the mountains, as always, are watching. The trail narrows as you climb, and your boots begin to find their own rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. The snow here is older, compacted into a firm, polite surface that doesn't complain when you walk on it. The air feels thinner now, quieter, as if sound itself has decided to conserve energy. You realize something else the mountain men understood. Movement is heat, but too much movement is a mistake. They walked like people who had nowhere else to be, which was often true. Rushing makes sweat. Sweat makes cold dangerous later. So they moved steadily, economically, like a sentence with no extra words. This brings us to a second major historical fact, one that rarely makes it into glossy survival manuals. Mountain men often intentionally allowed themselves to feel slightly cold. Not freezing, not miserable, just cool. Comfortable enough to function, uncomfortable enough to avoid sweating. Modern culture treats comfort as a default setting. Mountain men treated it as a variable. You pass a fallen log half buried in snow, its rings exposed like a quiet calendar of years gone by. A mountain man might stop here not to rest exactly, but to observe. Wind direction, cloud movement, the way snow gathers unevenly around rocks, revealing where warmth leaks from the earth. They read the land the way you read notifications, constantly, subconsciously, sometimes obsessively. Here's an obscure habit that feels almost poetic. Mountain men often kept their gloves or mittens tucked inside their coats when not in use, against their bodies, rather than in pockets. Cold leather stiffens. Warm leather obeys. Simple, effective, unromantic. You tuck your own hands into your pockets and feel the difference immediately. Warmer, slower, better. Somewhere ahead, the trees thin, and the wind returns, not angry, just curious. It brushes your face, testing you. The mountain men understood wind as the true threat. Cold air alone is manageable. Moving cold air steals heat with professional efficiency. This is why they favored natural windbreaks, rock walls, dense brush, the lee side of hills when stopping. It's also why their shelters were low, unimpressive, almost humble. Tall structures catch wind. Low ones survive it. You imagine a modern architect being told this. You imagine the architect nodding thoughtfully and then designing something tall anyway. There's a soft humor in all of this, a quiet irony. We have more technology than ever, and yet a drafty window can still ruin our night. Mountain men had fewer tools but deeper awareness. They didn't outsource thinking to equipment. Historians still debate how often mountain men truly traveled alone versus in loose, shifting networks, but solitude, real solitude, was undeniably part of the experience. Cold sharpens loneliness, but it also sharpens self-trust. You become responsible for your own warmth, your own judgment, your own survival. You pause and listen. Nothing dramatic happens. No wolves howl on cue. No music swells. Just wind, distant trees, your own breathing. This is how most of their days went. Quiet, practical, slightly uncomfortable, entirely real. You feel your eyelids grow heavier now, the steady pace lulling you. That's fine. Let them. The mountain men would approve of rest taken early, before exhaustion made decisions for you. As you continue forward, one thought settles in gently. The cold hasn't changed. We have. And somewhere in the trees ahead, the mountain is still waiting to teach the next lesson. Patiently, endlessly, without raising its voice. You wake before you meant to, not because of noise, there is none, but because the cold has gently tapped you on the shoulder, the way a polite messenger clears their throat instead of shouting your name. Your breath fogs the inside of whatever shelter you found, and for a brief moment you can't remember where you are. Then the smell of wood, old smoke, and frozen earth reminds you. You didn't sleep flat. You couldn't. The ground would have stolen too much heat, the way debt steals sleep in the modern world, quietly, relentlessly. Instead, you slept angled, propped against a pack and a tree, knees slightly bent, body folded into itself like a letter never sent. Mountain men slept like this often, not because it was comfortable, but because it worked. You stretch slowly. Slowly is important. Sudden movement in the cold feels louder, sharper, like tearing paper. Your joints complain in small, manageable ways. This is normal. This is information, not suffering. The fire nearby is mostly ash now, a few embers glowing faintly like the last thoughts before sleep fully wins. A mountain man would have banked the fire carefully the night before, not letting it roar itself to death. Fires, like people, need boundaries. Here's the major historical fact of this stretch of your journey. Mountain men often carried less fire-making equipment than you'd expect, relying instead on skill, preparation, and the landscape itself. Fire was precious, but it wasn't constant. Sometimes not making a fire at all was the safer choice. No smoke, no wasted fuel, no false sense of security. You brush frost from your coat. It crackles softly, like a quiet applause for having made it through the night. You check your boots. Dry enough. That matters more than warmth. Always dryness first. Warmth follows if it's in a good mood. As you walk again, you notice how the sun behaves differently in cold places. It rises, but it doesn't promise much. Light without warmth. Like a motivational quote without context. Mountain men understood sunlight as a timing tool more than a comfort. South-facing slopes held less snow. Valleys trapped cold air. Ridges caught wind. You don't need a compass if you can read these things. You just need attention. You stop near a cluster of rocks where the snow has melted unevenly, revealing dark stone beneath. This is a thermal clue. The ground here holds and releases heat differently. A good place to rest. Maybe even to camp later if the day stretches longer than planned, which it probably will. Here's an obscure cultural tidbit that feels almost tender. Some mountain men rubbed animal fat into their beards and hair during extreme cold. Not for style, though it probably helped, but to reduce frost buildup and protect skin from windburn. Imagine explaining this to a modern grooming influencer. You smile, then immediately regret it as cold air rushes into your mouth. Lesson learned. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were versus how much they varied by region and individual habit. Mountain men were not a monolith. They were improvisers, adapters, people who learned by surviving yesterday and adjusting today. You feel calmer now, your body fully awake but unhurried. The cold has stopped feeling like an obstacle and started feeling like a background condition, like gravity or time. It's just there. You work with it, not against it. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls. Short, efficient. Even birds know not to waste energy out here. You continue walking, each step deliberate, carrying another forgotten understanding with you. Survival in the cold is less about toughness and more about listening. The mountains don't reward bravado. They reward attention. Your eyelids grow heavy again, even as you move. That's okay. That's the rhythm. Wake, walk, rest, repeat. The mountain allows this. The day grows brighter without ever becoming warm. Light spreads across the snow, turning the world into a study in whites and blues, shadows stretching long and soft like they're tired too. You walk through it quietly, aware that sound carries farther in cold air. Every step feels like a sentence you don't want to over-explain. You begin to notice something subtle. You're not shivering. Not really. Your body has found a balance point, cool but functional. Mountain men aimed for this state deliberately. Shivering is not just discomfort. It's inefficiency. It burns energy you may need later. They adjusted layers constantly, opening coats, loosening bindings, venting heat before sweat could form. This brings us to another major historical fact. Mountain men often avoided over-insulation while moving, even in extreme cold. They dressed lighter on the trail and heavier at rest. Modern people tend to do the opposite, bundling up and then wondering why they feel damp and miserable 20 minutes later. You stop and adjust your own layers, imagining a mountain man nodding in quiet approval, or at least not shaking his head. Ahead, the land dips into a shallow basin where cold air settles like water. You feel it immediately. The temperature drops, the air thickens. This is a cold sink, a place mountain men avoided camping whenever possible. Cold pools here overnight, turning minor discomfort into danger. You skirt the edge instead, moving along slightly higher ground. It's a small choice, but small choices add up out here. Most mistakes in the cold are not dramatic. They are cumulative. Here's a strange and wonderful tidbit. Some mountain men chewed frozen meat like hard candy while traveling, letting it soften slowly in their mouths instead of stopping to cook. Cooking requires fire. Fire requires time, fuel, and visibility. Chewing requires patience and strong teeth. You consider this and feel grateful for modern dental care. The wind picks up again, sliding along the slope, testing seams and gaps. You turn your body slightly, angling yourself to reduce exposure. Mountain men learned to present themselves to the wind the way sailors present sails, intentionally. You pass the same stand of pines from earlier. Remember the one where the needles whispered? They sound different now, sharper, more alert. The mountain has moods. It doesn't hide them. Historians still debate how much mountain men consciously articulated these principles versus simply absorbing them through experience. Did they know these things? Or did they just live them? The distinction feels thin out here. You pause, resting one hand against a tree trunk. The bark is rough, dry, faintly warm where the sun touched it earlier. Trees store heat better than air. Another quiet lesson. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts stretch out, lengthen, lose their sharp edges. This is where sleepiness settles in. Not sudden, not heavy, just a gentle pull downward, like gravity remembering you exist. You realize something else we forgot. Cold teaches humility. You can't dominate it. You can't rush it. You can only cooperate. You take one more look across the snowbound landscape, light shimmering softly, shadows deepening. Somewhere ahead, more lessons wait, about food, about stillness, about when not to move at all. But for now, you walk, calm, measured, awake just enough. And the mountain, patient as ever, walks with you. You notice hunger before you feel tired. It arrives quietly, without drama, like a polite reminder rather than a demand. Mountain men expected this. Hunger in the cold behaves differently. It doesn't spike, it stretches. It becomes a low, steady hum, easy to ignore until it suddenly isn't. You stop near a rock outcrop where the wind thins and the snow gathers in gentle curves. This place feels intentional, chosen by the land itself. You settle in, not fully sitting, not fully standing, another compromise position perfected long before ergonomic chairs tried and failed to solve the same problem. Mountain men understood a major historical truth about cold and food. Fat matters more than fullness. Calories were not abstract numbers. They were fuel, insulation, and future movement. Meat with fat, rendered grease, marrow, these were prized not for flavor, but for survival efficiency. You imagine the disappointment of eating something filling but lean in deep cold. Your stomach feels busy, but your body feels betrayed. Here's an obscure but very real habit. Many mountain men carried small amounts of rendered animal fat and would add it to almost anything, dried meat, roots, even hot water, to turn it into a functional meal. It wasn't glamorous. It worked. You take a small bite of whatever you have. Slowly. Chewing generates heat. Rushing wastes it. Everything has a rhythm out here, including digestion. The wind shifts again, brushing the back of your neck. You pull your collar up slightly, not too much. Overcorrecting is another mistake the cold loves to punish later. Mountain men adjusted constantly, like sailors trimming sails. Historians still debate how often mountain men truly understood the nutritional science behind their diets versus simply responding to what kept them alive. But survival has a way of filtering out bad theories quickly. You finish eating without feeling full, and that's intentional. A full stomach can make you sluggish in the cold. Slight hunger keeps you alert. This is not motivational advice. This is a warning dressed as wisdom. You stand and move on, body warm enough, mind steady. Snow squeaks faintly now as the temperature drops further. That sound, high and dry, tells you the cold is deepening. You didn't check a thermometer. You didn't need to. Another forgotten understanding settles in. Cold speaks constantly. You just have to listen instead of scrolling past it. Your steps remain measured, almost meditative. Sleepiness drifts in and out, like clouds crossing the sun. That's fine. You're not meant to be sharp all the time out here. You're meant to be steady. The mountains don't reward intensity. They reward consistency. The light begins to fade earlier than you expect. Not suddenly, just enough to make you aware of time again. Mountain men watched light the way modern people watch battery percentages. Dusk wasn't romantic. It was logistical. You slow your pace without thinking about it. That instinct is old. Older than language, probably. In the cold, night magnifies everything. Distance, mistakes, confidence. Mountain men rarely pushed hard into darkness unless they had to, and they avoided having to whenever possible. Here's the major historical fact of this stretch. Mountain men often stopped traveling well before full dark, even if it meant covering fewer miles. Resting early conserved heat, reduced injury risk, and allowed for better fire management. Night travel in the cold was not brave. It was expensive. You find another sheltered spot, this one tucked against a rise where snow thins and earth peeks through. The ground here feels different, less eager to steal warmth. You prepare to settle in, movements slow and economical. You don't rush to sit. Sitting too quickly cools the body. Instead, you stand, breathe, let your heat stabilize. Mountain men treated stillness like another tool, used carefully. An odd cultural detail surfaces here. Some mountain men slept with their boots on, loosened but not removed, especially in extreme cold. Boots left outside could freeze solid overnight. Boots worn stayed usable. Comfort was negotiable. Mobility was not. You imagine modern bedtime routines colliding violently with this reality. You build a small fire, careful and modest. Flames low, smoke thin. You warm your hands gradually, turning them like bread you don't want to burn. Sudden heat feels almost intrusive now. Historians still debate how often mountain men relied on fires versus insulation alone, but the consensus leans toward restraint. Fire was a helper, not a dependency. As the sky deepens into blue-black, stars appear. Sharp, numerous, indifferent. Cold skies always feel closer, like the universe leaned in to check on you. Your body relaxes despite the temperature. Or maybe because of it. The cold narrows your world to essentials. Breath, posture, warmth, awareness. Everything else fades politely into the background. Sleepiness returns, heavier this time. You let it. Mountain men slept when they could, not when schedules allowed. Fatigue in the cold is not a moral failure. It's a signal. You settle into your angled rest again. Not flat, not tense. The fire murmurs. The wind pauses, listening. And as you drift, one more forgotten truth settles gently into place. Cold is not something to defeat before resting. It's something you rest within. The mountain keeps watch. You wake again without urgency. Not because you're fully rested, but because the cold has shifted slightly, and your body notices before your thoughts do. The fire has gone out completely now, leaving behind a circle of pale ash that looks like a memory more than an object. You breathe slowly, testing the air, checking yourself the way mountain men did, fingers, toes, nose, ears. Everything answers back. Good enough. Good enough is a very respectable outcome out here. You rise carefully, joints stiff but cooperative. Movement warms you faster than fire ever could. And mountain men knew this. They often delayed lighting a morning fire unless absolutely necessary. Fire consumes fuel. Motion creates heat for free, assuming you don't overdo it, which you won't because you're paying attention now. You walk again, boots finding their rhythm as the world lightens from black to deep blue. Dawn in the cold is quiet in a special way, like the day is still deciding whether to commit. Frost coats everything, turning ordinary objects, twigs, stones, your own sleeves, into fragile works of art. Here's the major historical fact for this stretch of the journey. Mountain men timed their hardest physical work for the coldest parts of the day. Early morning travel reduced sweating, conserved water, and took advantage of firmer snow. Midday, when the sun softened surfaces, was for slower movement or rest. Modern schedules invert this logic almost perfectly. You notice how the snow feels different underfoot now. Crisper, louder, more brittle. This tells you the temperature dropped further overnight. You didn't need to feel cold to know that. The ground already told you. An obscure but revealing habit comes to mind. Some mountain men deliberately kept a thin layer of frost on the outside of their clothing in extreme cold. It meant the moisture from their bodies was freezing externally instead of soaking inward. It looked uncomfortable. It was effective. You imagine explaining this to someone wearing a sleek, waterproof jacket with a brand name that implies invincibility. You smile faintly. The land opens up into a wide basin, snow stretching out like a held breath. You move along the edge, never straight through. Cold settles low. Wind sweeps high. The middle is rarely kind. Historians still debate how consciously mountain men applied these rules versus how much came from habit and imitation, but the results speak quietly for themselves. People who ignored the patterns didn't tend to leave long stories behind. Your breathing stays slow, deliberate. Inhale through the nose when you can. It warms the air slightly. Exhale gently. Sharp breaths waste heat. Another tiny adjustment. Another quiet win. You feel the familiar heaviness behind your eyes again. That's fine. The cold encourages rest in strange places. It simplifies thought. You're not bored. You're narrowed. As the sun finally clears the ridge, its light spills across the snow without warmth, like a promise written in a language you don't speak anymore. Mountain men didn't expect the sun to save them. They expected it to inform them. You keep walking, carrying another forgotten understanding with you. Cold rewards timing more than strength. The mountains remain silent, which is their way of saying you're doing fine. The wind returns gradually, not all at once. It slides across the snow in long, invisible strokes, reshaping drifts, erasing tracks, rewriting the story of where you've been. Mountain men expected this. Tracks were temporary. So were plans. You pull your hood tighter, not sealing yourself off, just negotiating. Total isolation traps moisture. Exposure steals heat. Balance lives in between. Here's another major historical fact. Mountain men paid obsessive attention to where they stopped, not just when. A rest in the wrong place, wind-exposed, low-lying, damp, could undo an entire day of careful travel. Stopping well was as important as moving well. You stop now, but only briefly, tucked behind a natural rise where the wind thins and the sound softens. The silence here feels padded, like the world wrapped itself in wool. An obscure, almost poetic practice surfaces. Some mountain men placed small objects, sticks, stones, into their boots at night to keep them from collapsing and freezing into unusable shapes. Improvised shoe trees. Cold turns neglect into consequence very quickly. You imagine modern footwear designers nodding respectfully. The sky has taken on that pale, endless look that suggests weather is thinking about changing its mind. You don't rush. Weather always wins arguments. Mountain men learn to watch clouds the way sailors watch waves. Shape, speed, height, intention. Historians still debate how accurately mountain men could predict weather compared to indigenous trackers, but there's little doubt they learned enough to stay alive. Perfect forecasts are unnecessary. Timely decisions are not. You adjust your pace slightly slower now. Fatigue in the cold isn't dramatic. It feels reasonable, persuasive. This is where mistakes begin, not with panic, but with small justifications. You don't justify, you respond. Your body has learned the pattern. Walk, pause, adjust, continue. It's almost soothing. Sleepiness settles over you like another layer. Not heavy, just present. You realize something else we forgot. Cold teaches you to respect limits without resenting them. You don't push because you want to. You move because it makes sense. The mountains seem closer now, not physically, but emotionally. Less like obstacles, more like companions who don't speak much but notice everything. You continue forward, breath steady, thoughts long and slow. Somewhere ahead, there are lessons about stillness, about knowing when not to move at all. But for now, you walk, calm, careful, and the cold walks with you, no longer a threat, just a condition you finally understand again. By the time you realize you've stopped hearing your own footsteps, you understand why mountain men trusted silence more than sound. Snow absorbs noise when it deepens, and the world grows quieter not because danger has passed, but because it's settling in. You stand still for a moment longer than necessary. Stillness, you're learning, is not the opposite of movement. It's part of it. Out here, pauses are punctuation, not endings. The cold presses in gently now, like a question rather than a threat. You answer it the way mountain men did. By adjusting layers, by rolling your shoulders, by wiggling fingers inside mittens that look crude but know their job. Mittens, not gloves. Separate fingers are a luxury the cold taxes heavily. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men overwhelmingly preferred mittens over gloves in deep cold, often lined with fur and designed to be easily shaken dry. Dexterity mattered less than heat retention. Survival beat convenience every time. You flex your hands. Clumsy, yes. Warm, also yes. The path bends downward into a stand of trees. Pines rise like quiet sentinels, their lower branches heavy with snow. The air changes immediately. The wind softens. The cold becomes more polite. Forests are nature's insulation, and mountain men chose campsites near treelines whenever possible. You step inside this sheltered world and feel the difference the way you feel a blanket settle over you. Not warmer exactly, but less exposed, less argued with. An obscure cultural tidbit drifts up with the scent of sap. Some mountain men chewed pine resin mixed with ash, believing it helped stave off hunger and cold. Whether it worked physiologically or psychologically remains unclear, but out here, morale counts as a physical resource. You don't chew resin. You breathe instead. Slowly, deeply. Cold air carries smells better, and the forest smells old and patient. You find a fallen log and sit, not collapsing, just lowering yourself with care. Sitting directly on snow steals heat fast, so you brush the surface clean and perch lightly, feet planted. Another lesson we forgot. Rest doesn't mean surrendering posture. Historians still debate how much of this knowledge mountain men developed independently versus borrowing directly from indigenous survival practices, but the overlap is unmistakable. Cold does not reward ownership. It rewards listening. You feel drowsy again, heavier this time. That's fine. Sleepiness in the cold is a known trick, a gentle lie whispered by comfort. Mountain men didn't fight it aggressively. They acknowledged it, then countered it with motion or fire. Not yet, though. You're not done resting. You glance back the way you came. Remember the open basin from earlier? Feels very far away now, like a thought you finished already. The forest has replaced it without ceremony. 3 light jokes slip through your mind, uninvited but welcome. You think about how modern wellness influencers would call this cold immersion and charge for it. You imagine a smartwatch politely panicking at your current conditions. You consider how badly your phone would perform right now and feel a little smug. The cold doesn't care about any of that. You rise again, not hurried, just ready. You leave the log exactly as you found it because mountain men understood something else we forgot. Leaving no trace isn't about ethics alone. It's about not needing to explain yourself to the land. You move deeper into the trees, carrying warmth carefully, like a candle in your chest. The day shortens without warning. That's one of the cold's quiet tricks. Light slips away early, even when the sun still hangs above the horizon. Shadows stretch long and thin, and you feel time tightening its grip. Mountain men planned for this. They didn't measure days in hours. They measured them in usable light. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often stopped traveling earlier than felt necessary in winter, prioritizing camp preparation over distance. A well-prepared night mattered more than a few extra miles. You feel that decision approaching now. The land suggests it before your body does. A hollow between trees, a slope that blocks the wind, snow-packed just enough to work with. You choose the spot not because it's perfect, but because it's adequate and available. Perfection is expensive out here. You begin the small rituals of stopping. Boots off briefly, socks checked, feet rubbed. You don't linger barefoot. Exposure is always negotiated. You add dry layers even if you don't feel cold yet. Mountain men dressed for the next hour, not the current minute. An obscure but telling detail surfaces. Some mountain men slept with tomorrow's clothes inside their bedding to keep them from freezing solid overnight. It wasn't comfort. It was practicality disguised as intimacy. You lay out your space carefully. Bed first. Fire second. Food last. You reverse the order of modern thinking because warmth comes before appetite. Historians still debate how often mountain men traveled entirely alone versus in loose networks, but solitude was common enough that self-reliance became instinct. No one is coming to fix mistakes. You light a small fire, not roaring, not dramatic, just enough to speak back to the cold without shouting. The flames glow low and steady, reflecting off snowbanks like soft lanterns. The forest seems to lean closer, curious but not concerned. You eat slowly, fat-heavy food. Simple. You chew more than you need to, partly for warmth, partly because there's nowhere else to be. The cold has simplified your schedule beautifully. 3 more gentle ironies drift in. You realize you've never felt more present while doing less. You acknowledge that minimalism hits differently when it's mandatory. You suspect this would make a terrible productivity seminar. The fire settles into coals. You bank it carefully because wasted fuel is future cold. Mountain men thought ahead because the cold forces honesty about consequences. You slide into your bedding, layers arranged with intention. Not tight, not loose, balanced. Your breath fogs once, then steadies. The forest hums faintly, a sound you feel more than hear. Remember the fire circle from earlier? It's back, smaller now, but still doing its quiet work. As sleep approaches, you carry one more forgotten understanding with you. Cold is not an enemy. It's a teacher with very high standards. Your thoughts stretch, slow, soften. The mountains remain. The cold remains. And you drift not away from the lesson but deeper into it. You wake before you fully wake. That is to say, your body stirs first, nudged by temperature rather than thought. The cold has crept closer during the night, not aggressively, just enough to remind you that it never sleeps even when you do. Mountain men trusted this sensation. It was an alarm clock older than clocks, quieter than bells. You don't rush. Rushing wastes heat. You flex fingers inside your bedding, testing circulation. Toes respond slowly, but they respond. Good. The fire you banked last night has left a faint warmth in the ground, like a memory still holding on. Here is the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often woke multiple times during the night in winter, not from fear but from habit, checking fire, adjusting bedding, shifting position to maintain warmth. Continuous, uninterrupted sleep was a luxury, not a goal. You sit up gradually, breath slow, letting your body catch up with the idea of morning. The forest is darker than you expect. Winter dawn is shy, and the trees don't encourage it. You add a stick to the fire. Just one. Flames lick upward politely. Too much fire invites sweating. Sweat invites cold later. Everything is a negotiation with consequences delayed just long enough to be tempting. An obscure cultural tidbit surfaces as you warm your hands. Some mountain men slept wearing a loose wool cap pulled low over the eyes, not just for warmth, but to reduce frost forming on eyelashes from breath. Small discomforts managed early prevented bigger ones later. You imagine modern sleep trackers trying to interpret this routine and giving up entirely. Historians still debate whether mountain men understood the physiological mechanisms behind heat loss or simply observed patterns and obeyed them, but understanding is not a requirement for wisdom. Repetition teaches what theory sometimes can't. You eat lightly. Heavy food now would slow you. You save it for later when the work demands it. Cold sharpens appetite, but discipline sharpens survival. As you step outside your shelter, the night sky is still overhead, stars sharp and indifferent. You feel smaller than you did yesterday, not weaker, just more accurately sized. Your breath crystallizes in front of you, a small cloud that vanishes quickly. You follow its example. You move again, slow and steady, letting the act of walking finish warming you. Remember the mittens from earlier? They're stiff now, but they soften with use. So do you. 3 light, sleepy observations drift through your mind. You realize coffee is not actually necessary to feel awake. You wonder how many modern cold exposure challenges would end right here. You briefly miss heated floors, then forget about them completely. The forest thins as you climb. Elevation changes the cold's behavior. Wind returns, sharper, more opinionated. You angle your body instinctively, presenting less surface the way mountain men learned without mirrors. By the time the sun finally breaks through, it does so quietly, like it doesn't want to interrupt. Its light catches on frost-covered branches, turning them into something ceremonial. You pause not to admire, but to register. Beauty is data, too. Clear skies mean colder nights ahead. You keep moving, carrying another lesson forward. The cold rewards attentiveness more than endurance. The land remains quiet. You remain awake. By midday, the world has softened just enough to become deceptive. The sun hangs higher now, and its presence changes the texture of everything it touches. Snow that was firm this morning grows slushy, uneven, prone to collapse without warning. Mountain men adjusted their expectations with the temperature, not their optimism. You slow your pace. Faster now would mean sweating, slipping, misjudging. This is the hour when restraint matters most. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men frequently altered travel routes as temperatures rose, favoring shaded areas and north-facing slopes to maintain stable footing and conserve energy. The land changed throughout the day, and so did their plans. You move into shadow where you can, letting trees do the work of protection. The cold here feels different, duller, heavier, less sharp. Not better, just altered, and obscure detail surfaces. Some mountain men rubbed animal fat onto exposed skin in extreme cold, not just for insulation but to reduce windburn. It smelled unpleasant. It worked. Comfort was optional. Function was not. You paused to drink. Water is cold enough to sting, but dehydration in winter is subtle and dangerous. You sip, not gulp. Cold discourages thirst, which is precisely why you don't trust that instinct. Historians still debate how often mountain men carried detailed mental maps versus relying on landmarks and seasonal memory, but the evidence suggests they trusted familiarity over abstraction. Knowing how a place felt mattered as much as knowing where it was. The terrain dips and rises gently, like the land is breathing beneath the snow. You follow its rhythm, not imposing your own. This is another thing we forgot. Imposing effort rarely works long-term in the cold. You rest again, briefly, standing this time. Sitting invites stillness too deeply. You roll shoulders, flex knees. Movement without progress is still movement. 3 quiet ironies pass through your thoughts. You realize taking it slow requires constant attention. You acknowledge that efficiency looks different when survival is the metric. You suspect winter would fix several modern scheduling problems instantly. Clouds gather in the distance, thin and stretched, like thoughts forming but not committing. You note their direction, their speed. Weather announces itself long before it arrives, if you're willing to watch without demanding certainty. You resume walking, mind calm, body aligned. Remember the basin from yesterday. It's gone now, replaced by rolling ground that feels familiar even if you've never been here. Patterns repeat. Lessons echo. As afternoon drifts toward evening again, you feel the day settling, closing itself gently. You've learned to anticipate this without anxiety. The cold is steady. Your warmth is steady. And somewhere between them, you continue forward, carrying knowledge that doesn't shout, doesn't hurry, and doesn't forget. The afternoon thins into evening the way a thought thins into a feeling. Not abruptly, just gradually enough that you only notice when it's already happening. The light flattens, shadows stretch, and the cold, patient as ever, reclaims a little more territory. Mountain men watched for this moment carefully. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was informative. You adjust your layers again, adding just enough insulation to stay ahead of the temperature drop. The key is anticipation. Waiting until you feel cold is already too late. That's a lesson written quietly into muscle memory. Here is the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often judged evening temperatures by how quickly exposed moisture froze. Spit, breath, damp cloth. Using these cues to decide whether to build a more insulated shelter or conserve energy for movement. They didn't need numbers. They needed outcomes. You test the air with your breath. It crystallizes almost instantly. Noted. The land opens slightly, offering a view you didn't ask for but accept anyway. Low hills roll outward, softened by snow, interrupted by darker lines of trees. The scene feels unfinished, like the world paused mid-sentence. An obscure cultural tidbit drifts up. Some mountain men intentionally kept their camps visually dull. No bright fabrics, no sharp contrasts, believing it reduced strain on tired eyes in winter light. Subtlety, once again, was a form of care. You move along the edge of the clearing rather than through its center. Exposure invites wind. Wind invites heat loss. You're done inviting things today. Historians still debate how often mountain men traveled in complete silence versus speaking or singing softly, but many accounts suggest they favored quiet, not for stealth, but for awareness. Sound carries differently in the cold, and silence lets the land speak first. You hear it now, the faint creak of trees tightening in the drop of temperature. Snow settling, a distant snap that could be wood or ice or nothing at all. You feel tired, but not drained. There's a difference. Mountain men learned to distinguish between exhaustion and readiness for rest. One is dangerous, the other is productive. 3 gentle, tired observations float through your mind. You realize that being cold and being uncomfortable are not the same thing. You briefly consider how long a motivational quote would last out here. You decide the answer is not long. You select another campsite as the light fades. Not perfect, but sheltered, familiar in its geometry. You recognize the pattern now: windbreak, slope, snow depth, fuel nearby. The checklist no longer feels like effort. As you begin preparing for night, the cold settles again, heavier but not hostile, simply doing what it does. And you, quietly, are doing what mountain men once did, meeting it without complaint, without bravado, with calm attention. Night arrives fully this time, confident and unhurried. The stars come out sharp and numerous, like the sky has decided to show everything at once. Cold nights tend to do that. Clarity is one of winter's small mercies. You move carefully through your evening routine, each action slower than it would be anywhere else. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because precision saves heat, saves energy, saves tomorrow. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often reduced movement dramatically after nightfall in winter, conserving calories and warmth by settling early and limiting unnecessary tasks. Night was for maintenance, not productivity. You build a fire smaller than instinct suggests. Big fires feel comforting, but they consume fuel fast and encourage overheating. You want steady warmth, not drama. An obscure but practical detail surfaces. Some mountain men arranged firewood by size and burned time before sleeping, so they could add fuel half awake without fumbling. Organization was not a personality trait, it was survival. You sit close enough to the fire to feel it, far enough to avoid sweating. Sweat is the cold's favorite long-term strategy. Historians still debate how much solitude affected mountain men psychologically, but journals suggest many found winter nights strangely peaceful. Isolation stripped life down to essentials. There was relief in that. You eat again, slowly, deliberately. Fat and warmth pair well together. You chew and listen to the fire crackle softly, each sound distinct in the frozen air. 3 final ironies drift lazily through your thoughts. You realize boredom is a luxury you don't have out here. You accept that doing less has never felt more intentional. You suspect sleep will arrive whether you invite it or not. You prepare your bedding, remembering the lessons from earlier, clothes nearby, boots positioned, nothing left to chance. You slide inside, layers settling around you like practiced hands. The fire dims. The forest holds steady. Your breathing slows. Thoughts stretch and soften, no longer insisting on resolution. Remember the silence from earlier? It's deeper now, fuller, like a lake that has frozen without complaint. As sleep pulls you under, one more understanding settles gently into place. Cold does not need to be conquered. It only needs to be respected. You drift, carried by that thought, while the mountains keep watch without judgment. Morning returns quietly, almost apologetically. You don't wake so much as surface, drifting upward from sleep as the cold nudges you into awareness. Your breath fogs inside your bedding, a small private weather system that tells you everything you need to know about the night you've just survived. It was cold. It was steady. You did fine. Mountain men trusted mornings like this. If you woke up functional, the system was working. You stay still for a moment, listening. The forest sounds different today, less brittle, more muted. Snow has fallen overnight, a light dusting that softened edges and lowered the volume of the world. Fresh snow insulates. It hides danger and protects against it at the same time. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often welcomed fresh snowfall in winter, despite the added difficulty of travel, because it insulated the ground, preserved moisture, and made tracking animals easier. Cold was a problem. Dry cold was worse. You shift slowly, testing joints, circulation, awareness. Everything answers back in its own time. No alarms. No urgency. An obscure cultural tidbit surfaces as you reach for your boots. Some mountain men warmed stiff footwear by holding it over steam rather than direct fire, reducing the risk of cracking leather. Even their impatience had limits. You put your boots on carefully, working feet into shape rather than forcing them. Leather remembers how it's treated. So do bodies. Historians still debate how often mountain men stayed in one place for extended winter camps versus remaining mobile, but evidence suggests flexibility mattered more than loyalty to either strategy. Staying put too long drained resources. Moving too often drained energy. You step outside. The sky is pale, the sun diffused behind cloud, turning the landscape into a soft charcoal sketch. Snow muffles sound again. Your footsteps disappear almost as soon as you make them. 3 gentle morning thoughts drift through you. You realize waking up cold feels less offensive than waking up stressed. You accept that roughing it has been dramatically misrepresented. You briefly wonder how many meetings could be replaced by walking quietly. You eat a modest breakfast. Not much. Enough. Food in the cold works better when it's frequent and unremarkable. You move on, leaving the campsite without ceremony. Remember the shelter you built 2 nights ago? It's already fading. Snow filling in edges, smoothing signs. The land erases kindly when you don't argue with it. As the day unfolds, you notice how the cold behaves differently after snowfall. Less biting, more enveloping. You adjust your pace accordingly, letting the land lead without insisting on understanding every reason. You're no longer thinking about staying warm. You're thinking about maintaining balance. The difference matters. You walk forward, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who knows that cold is not a problem to be solved, just a condition to be lived with. By midday, the clouds thin, and the sun returns with modest ambition. Its light filters through bare branches and snow-laden pines, creating patterns that feel intentional even if they aren't. The cold shifts again, becoming sharper where shadows linger, gentler where light pools briefly before moving on. Mountain men notice this too. Light, even cold light, matters. Here is the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often chose rest periods based on sunlight exposure rather than time, stopping where the sun could offer even slight warmth and resuming travel when shade reclaimed the ground. Winter schedules followed the sky, not clocks. You stop where the light falls longest, leaning against a tree that blocks the wind just enough. You close your eyes briefly, not to sleep, just to let warmth register. An obscure but strangely comforting detail surfaces. Some mountain men believed sunlight in winter carried strength, not in a mystical sense, but as a reminder that conditions were temporary. Whether that belief helped physically or mentally hardly matters. Historians still debate how much mountain men relied on superstition versus pragmatism, but the two were often intertwined. Ritual gave structure. Structure conserved energy. You stretch slowly, careful not to sweat. Sweat is still the enemy, even on days like this. You've learned to recognize its approach before it arrives. 3 soft, midday ironies drift through your thoughts. You realize rest takes more discipline than motion. You acknowledge that nature has better scheduling instincts than you do. You suspect winter would make an excellent life coach if slightly unforgiving. The trail narrows, guiding you toward higher ground again. Snow thins where wind has scoured it away, revealing frozen earth beneath. You adjust footing, knees loose, steps measured. Falling in the cold is less dramatic than imagined, and far more consequential. You don't fall. As afternoon deepens, the cold begins its familiar reclaiming. The sun lowers, shadows stretch, and the world prepares for evening without asking your opinion. You're ready this time, not because you're tougher, but because you've learned when to listen. You move forward calmly, breath steady, awareness wide. Remember the first night, when the cold felt like something to endure. That feeling has softened now, replaced by something closer to partnership. The mountains remain quiet, the cold remains honest, and you continue on, carrying knowledge that doesn't rush, doesn't boast, and doesn't forget where it came from. The evening approaches again, not suddenly, but with a familiar confidence, as if it knows you now. You feel it first in the air. The cold tightens its posture, becoming more exact, more attentive. It's the kind of cold that listens for mistakes. Mountain men learn to listen back. You slow your pace without thinking about it. That's new. Earlier in the journey, slowing down took intention. Now it arrives naturally, like blinking. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men deliberately shortened their daily travel distances in prolonged cold spells, prioritizing consistency over ambition. 10 safe miles every day beat 20 reckless ones once. You choose your route with care, favoring gentle slopes and familiar terrain. Steep climbs generate heat quickly, but they also steal breath, sweat reserves, and judgment. You've learned to distrust shortcuts. An obscure cultural tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some mountain men used small personal rituals at day's end, cleaning a pipe, sharpening a blade, folding cloth in a specific order, not for utility alone, but to mark the transition from movement to stillness. Cold days blurred together. Ritual gave them edges. You begin to feel that blur now. Days stacking quietly, lessons repeating with small variations. Historians still debate how mentally taxing winter solitude was for mountain men, but many accounts suggest that repetition itself became comforting. When conditions are harsh, predictability feels like kindness. The land tilts gently downward, and you follow without resistance. Wind fades again as trees gather closer. Snow deepens but stays soft. The forest is doing its quiet work. 3 gentle evening thoughts wander through you. You realize the cold hasn't changed, you have. You notice that fear left without making a scene. You suspect comfort is not the same thing as ease. You select a campsite early. Earlier than necessary, earlier than you would have at the start of this journey. That choice feels wise rather than cautious. You build your shelter methodically, hands moving with calm efficiency. There's no rush now. The cold respects preparation done without drama. As the fire settles into a low, steady glow, you feel something unfamiliar. Confidence that doesn't demand proof. You're not testing yourself anymore. You're cooperating. You sit, breathe, eat. The forest remains quiet. The cold remains present. And for the first time, you don't think about surviving the night. You think about resting in it. The night deepens, slower than before, like it's stretching itself out. Stars appear again, bright and numerous, but you don't study them as closely now. You've learned when observation matters and when rest matters more. Tonight is for the latter. You lie back inside your bedding, arranged with practiced care. Nothing presses, nothing gaps. The balance feels earned. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Mountain men often slept lightly in extreme cold, drifting in and out of rest, allowing small adjustments throughout the night to prevent dangerous heat loss. Sleep was flexible, not sacred. You shift once, adjusting a shoulder, tucking fabric closer. The movement is small, precise. You don't fully wake. You don't need to. An obscure detail surfaces gently. Some mountain men placed warm stones, heated carefully, never hot, near their feet or core to extend fire warmth through the night. Primitive, yes. Effective, absolutely. Historians still debate how often such techniques were used versus improvised as needed, but adaptation was the constant. Cold rewarded creativity more than tradition. You feel the cold pressing against your shelter now, testing seams, testing patience. It finds nothing dramatic. No panic. No neglect. Just steady resistance. 3 quiet, sleepy ironies drift through your thoughts. You realize stillness can be active. You accept that comfort here is quieter than you expected. You suspect this is what enough feels like. The forest settles further. Sounds stretch apart, leaving wide spaces between them. Your breathing fills those spaces briefly, then recedes. Remember the first night, when every sensation felt sharp and unfamiliar. That distance feels enormous now. The cold hasn't softened, but your relationship with it has. You drift again, deeper this time, thoughts loosening their grip. The mountains remain awake so you don't have to. And as sleep takes you fully, one final understanding settles without effort. Cold doesn't break you, teaches you where you end, and how to live well inside that boundary. Morning arrives one last time, not as an interruption, but as a continuation. You wake slowly, aware of yourself before aware of the world. The cold is still there, of course. It always is, but it no longer feels like something pressing inward. It feels more like a boundary you've learned to live inside, firm, clear, honest. You breathe once, deep and unhurried. Your breath fogs, then fades. Everything still works. That quiet success settles warmly in your chest. Mountain men valued mornings like this more than easy days. If you woke up intact after a long stretch of cold, it meant your habits were aligned with reality. Here's the major historical fact for this section. Many mountain men measured the success of a winter not by distance traveled or profit made, but simply by whether they emerged in spring healthy enough to continue. Survival itself was the achievement. You rise, joints stiff but willing, and complete your final routine with practiced ease. Fire tended, bedding packed, boots checked, Nothing rushed. Nothing forgotten. An obscure cultural tidbit surfaces gently. Some mountain men marked the end of particularly harsh winters by carving small notches into tools or rifle stocks, not as trophies, but as quiet records. A way of saying, I was here. I adapted. You step outside and feel the day waiting. The sky is pale, stretched wide, with the kind of light that suggests change is coming. Not immediately, but inevitably. The cold has a season, and it knows it. Historians still debate how much long-term exposure to winter reshaped the personalities of mountain men, but many accounts describe a particular calm, a reduced tolerance for excess, and a deep trust in simple routines. You walk forward one last time, not into danger, not into comfort, just onward. The snow crunches softly beneath your boots, a familiar sound now, almost reassuring. 3 final, gentle reflections drift through you. You realize you're warmer now than when you started, despite the same temperature. You notice that fear never really leaves, it just stops being in charge. You suspect modern life forgot these lessons because it rarely had to remember them. The land opens slightly ahead, hinting at lower elevations, gentler conditions. You don't rush toward them. There's no need. You pause, turning once more to look at the mountains behind you. They haven't changed. They never do. What changed happened quietly inside you. And as you move on, you carry the last great understanding mountain men lived by. Cold doesn't demand toughness. It demands attention, humility, and patience. You have learned all 3. You slow now, not because you must, but because the journey is easing itself toward rest. The cold remains present, but it feels farther away somehow, like a conversation winding down rather than an argument unresolved. Your body moves with an ease that didn't exist at the beginning, each step measured, familiar, unremarkable in the best possible way. Mountain men understood this phase well. The cold season didn't end abruptly. It loosened its grip gradually, teaching one last lesson before stepping aside. Here is the final major historical fact. Mountain men who survived multiple winters often spoke less about hardship and more about rhythm. Knowing when to move, when to stop, when to wait, and when to let the land decide for them. You walk without urgency now. The trees thin. The wind softens. Snow gives way to patches of frozen earth beneath. Change announces itself quietly. An obscure, almost tender detail surfaces. Some mountain men kept winter-worn clothing even after conditions improved, not out of necessity, but familiarity. The garments had learned their bodies. Comfort lived in that knowing. Historians still debate whether this attachment was sentimental or practical, but perhaps it was both. Survival leaves marks that don't fade quickly. You come to a natural pause, not a destination, just a moment where movement feels complete. You stop and breathe. The air is still cold, but not severe. Balanced. Like you. The mountains behind you fade into distance without resentment. They taught what they needed to teach. Now the story slows with you. Your breathing deepens, lengthens. Thoughts stretch and soften, no longer pulling at one another. Images from earlier return gently. The first fire, the sharp night stars, the quiet forests, the steady mornings. They pass like clouds, unhurried. You feel your body settle, heavy in a pleasant way, as if the ground itself is offering support. Muscles loosen, jaw unclenches, shoulders drop. There is nothing left to solve. The cold no longer asks questions. It has already received its answers. You rest here, in this calm understanding, knowing that what mountain men once knew was never lost, only waiting. Waiting for quiet, waiting for attention, waiting for someone willing to slow down enough to remember. And as your awareness drifts, softer and softer, the world remains steady, holding its temperature, holding its silence, holding you gently in place. There is no ending to rush toward. Only rest, only stillness, only sleep.